Do Americans trust their government? Well, as we've shown over and over again, absolutely not. But what if, perhaps, a large portion of Americans actually thought that a federal agency conspired to assassinate a sitting president of the United States? What would you call that? A violent coup? That would be pretty big news if Americans thought that, wouldn't it be? Well, here are the numbers, and read them and weep. 42%, a plurality of U.S. likely voters, think it's at least somewhat likely the CIA was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. 21% say very likely. 41% say not likely, and only 18% of them say not at all likely. That's incredible. More voters think that the CIA was involved in assassinating a president than would actually vote for Joe Biden today in a 2024 rematch. And less than 2 in 10 voters can absolutely confidently say that the CIA was not at all likely involved in the assassination. And there is a party signal, but not a huge one. 48% of Republicans think it's likely, but only 25% say very likely. 37% of Democrats agree, though only 17% think it's very likely, and independents are basically split. But look at the not sures. There are still quite a lot of people who aren't willing to chime in yet. But for what is probably the absolute best example I've ever seen of street smarts, here's what Americans think about the JFK assassination by education. Those with graduate degrees are much more trusting of the CIA than those with fewer credentials. A stunning 70% of high school dropouts think it's likely the CIA was involved in the assassination, and only 2% of them say it's not at all likely, whereas only 28% of graduate degree holders think it's likely the CIA was involved, and only 14% of them say very likely. And for another eye-opening trend, it's younger voters who are much more likely to think the CIA was involved. A majority of them say yes, and only 38% say no. But only 31% of those over age 65, the ones who were actually alive when the assassination happened, say that the CIA was involved. And only 14% of them say very likely, but 46% say not likely. And older voters are also much more likely to say they're not sure than younger voters. So why is it younger voters with the tinfoil hat on? Is it because maybe they consume more alternative news sources? Maybe they're more cynical? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments at YouTube. Here's the question we've been asking about JFK's assassination in the past. 38% of voters say that Kennedy was assassinated by a lone gunman, but 38% of them also say he was the victim of a conspiracy. 24% aren't sure. This is definitely hitting on a different and perhaps more specific angle than the previous question, whether Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And we'll get more into the difference, but we have history on this question. Here's the first time we asked it in November of 2013, and you can see the numbers aren't much different, despite the fact that this question is adults and not likely voters. But when we asked in 2017, people were much more likely than before or after to say he was assassinated by a lone gunman. But look at this slide. Republicans and Democrats were roughly in agreement 10 years ago, with a small plurality of both of them saying it was a conspiracy. But now Democrats are much more likely to say it was a lone gunman, but 47% of Republicans say that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Maybe they're being influenced by mainstream news fact-checking articles like this one, shilling for the government, instead of calling for sealed Kennedy assassination files to be released. But since we're now on that topic, the Biden administration recently declared that it can't release all of the government records associated with the Kennedy assassination because of national security concerns. What do voters think about the administration's decision to keep those records secret? They pretty strongly disapprove, 54%, a majority, and only 37% approve, 19% strongly, 8% aren't sure. Now this is a pretty strong signal because approve always gets a bit of a bump from agreeable people. Now, since we brought up age before, here are the age results for this question. And despite the fact they're most likely to think the CIA was involved in Kennedy's assassination, 18 to 39-year-olds are also most likely to approve of the administration's decision to keep the records under wraps. Only 36% disapprove. But older voters overwhelmingly disapprove, about 62% to 32%. And here are the party results. 57% of Democrats approve, but only 31% strongly. And it's important to note that Biden's approval among Democrats is almost 20 points higher than approval on this specific issue, meaning that this isn't exactly a popular decision with Democrats. But it definitely isn't popular among Republicans and independents. They poll almost identically here, more than 2-1 against Biden's decision to keep the Kennedy assassination record sealed. Now, here's an interesting slide. Those who say Kennedy was assassinated by a lone gunman are much more in favor of the documents remaining closed than those who think Kennedy was a victim of conspiracy. 67% of them disapprove of this decision, more than anyone except Republicans and Biden's strong disapprovers. To me, the implication is that the disapprovers think that the government may still be trying to actively cover up its involvement. But to illustrate that more clearly, check this out. Here's how likely voters think the CIA was involved in Kennedy's assassination by whether they say he was assassinated by a lone gunman or by a conspiracy. Only 27% of those who say lone gunman think it's possible the CIA was involved, but 65% say no way. But 72% of those who think there was a conspiracy think that the CIA was involved, and 41% of them say it was very likely, the highest of anywhere in the crosstabs except for those high school dropouts. Now, what's to make of these numbers? I'm not really sure. It is newsworthy that a significant chunk of the electorate doesn't trust a really important federal agency. But this topic also just isn't as fresh as, say, the Capitol riot. Recall from April that 65% of voters think that undercover agents helped provoke the Capitol riot, and 46% said very likely. So Americans seem to be pretty adapted to the concept that their own government is running ops against them. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump continues to poll at the top of the heap. Night 1 out of 3 of our latest Trump favorability set just came back. And let's just say this, if the trend continues to hold, there's going to be some really major news soon. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube or Rumble so you don't miss it, and thanks for watching.